When people ask why I stopped working in old estates, I keep my answer short. Mirrors. I used to love restoring them, delicate engravings, tarnished silvering, the captured magic of centuries past. But now, even catching my reflection in a puddle is enough to send a shiver down my spine. My last assignment was at Grace Hall Manor. Once a proud estate, the years and indifference had left it in decay. The owner, a mysterious man with a faint European accent, hired me to restore a massive mirror in the main hall. It was a colossal piece, framed in dark oak carved with unsettling scenes, serpents coiling around trees, faint faces peeking from branches, and something that looked disturbingly like a figure watching from behind them. I didn't come alone. My assistant, Lena, was with me. She had a knack for detail that complemented my work perfectly. More importantly, I trusted her. Lena was a sharp contrast to me, brave, curious, and always the first to dismiss my more superstitious tendencies. The first evening at the manor was uneventful. Too uneventful. No birdsong, no rustling leaves outside the tall windows. We worked late into the night, cleaning layers of grime from the mirror. It was as if the glass resisted our touch, the silver tarnish beneath refusing to yield. But when we finally uncovered the surface, something felt wrong. The reflection didn't look right. It wasn't us. Standing before it, I could swear I saw movement just beyond the glass. A shadow, fleeting and vague, like a face shifting in the dimness. "Did you see that?" I asked Lena, my voice wavering. "See what?" she replied, peering at the mirror. "It's just your reflection. You're tired." I wanted to believe her, but as I turned away, I saw it again. A shape, there one moment and gone the next, just beyond where the wall should be. That night, we stayed at the manor. The owner had offered rooms on the second floor, claiming it was too late to drive back. Lena and I each had our own chambers, but before heading to bed, I joined her for tea. "The place is creepy, sure," she said with her usual confidence, "but it's just an old house. Mirrors don't move on their own." I nodded, though unease gnawed at me. As I prepared for sleep, I noticed the small mirror in my room was oddly cold to the touch. Its glass seemed darker, almost murky. I threw a blanket over it, hoping to block out the unsettling feeling. Somewhere in the night, a sound woke me. A faint, rhythmic tapping. I sat up, straining to listen. It was coming from the mirror. I stared at the blanket covering the mirror, my pulse hammering in my ears. The tapping was soft, deliberate, too regular to be a trick of the wind. Swallowing my fear, I slid out of bed and approached cautiously. "Lena?" I called out, hoping she'd somehow decided to play a prank. No answer. The tapping continued, steady as a heartbeat. With trembling hands, I lifted the blanket. The mirror surface was dark, almost black, and my reflection was barely visible, as though it were submerged in murky water. And then I saw it. A pale hand pressed against the inside of the glass, fingers splayed, as though trying to push through. I stumbled back, choking on a scream. The hand vanished, leaving only my reflection staring back at me. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the reflection, stood a figure shrouded in shadows. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, calculating, inhuman. I spun around. The room was empty. Desperate, I grabbed the blanket and threw it over the mirror again, then bolted for Lena's room. She opened the door a moment later, blinking in confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice groggy. There's something in the mirror," I whispered, barely able to form the words. "I saw it." Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? You've been on edge since we got here." "I know what I saw," I insisted, clutching her arm. "Please, just come with me." Lena hesitated, but eventually nodded. Together, we returned to my room. The blanket still covered the mirror, and everything was quiet. Lena approached the mirror, pulling the blanket off with a quick motion. The glass was clear, reflecting the room as it should. "There's nothing here," she said gently, though her tone carried a note of skepticism. "Maybe you're overtired. You've been working nonstop." I shook my head, feeling the weight of disbelief in her words. "I swear it wasn't a dream." There was a hand. And Something behind me. Look, she said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Why don't we get some sleep and check it out in the morning? Maybe there's a logical explanation. Reluctantly, I agreed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed the image of that hand, the shadowy figure. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Grace Hall Manor, the walls stretching endlessly, the mirrors in every room filled with faces that weren't mine. Morning brought little comfort. The sunlight filtering through the windows did nothing to warm the chill that clung to the air. Lena was already up, setting out her tools by the main hall's mirror. "You sure you're okay to work today?" she asked as I approached. "Yeah," I lied. "I'll be fine." We spent the morning cleaning the intricate carvings of the frame. The unsettling images, serpents, faces, and figures in the branches seemed almost alive in the shifting light. Lena ran her fingers over one carving, a hunched figure peeking from behind a tree. "Whoever made this had a pretty twisted imagination," she remarked. I nodded, but my attention was on the mirror itself. The glass shimmered faintly, as though something was moving beneath the surface. I kept glancing at it, expecting to see that hand again. But it didn't appear. By afternoon, Lena seemed to share my unease. She stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans. "There's something off about this thing," she admitted. "It's like it's watching us." Relief flooded me. "You see it too?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know what it is, but—" Her words were cut off by a sound. A low, guttural whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from the mirror. We froze, staring at it. The sound grew louder, though the words were indistinct, a garbled mixture of voices overlapping each other. Lena stepped closer, her breath shallow. "What is it saying?" "I don't know," I whispered. "And I don't think I want to." The whisper stopped suddenly, plunging the room into silence. For a moment we stood there, our reflections staring back at us. Then, in unison, our reflections turned their heads, not to look at us, but at something behind us. We spun around, expecting to see someone or something standing behind us. But the room was empty, save for the dim light filtering through the tall windows. My heart pounded in my chest as Lena whispered, "What the hell is happening?" Before I could answer, the mirror began to hum. The surface rippled like water, distorting our reflections until they dissolved into a dark void. From that void, shapes began to emerge, twisted, featureless figures clawing at the glass, their movements frantic and violent. "Run!" Lena shouted, grabbing my arm. But the door to the hall slammed shut with a deafening crack, the walls trembling with the force. The air grew icy, the sound of scratching and whispering filling the room as if the mirror itself was alive. One of the figures began pressing harder against the glass, its form stretching outward. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just trying to escape, it was succeeding. The first clawed hand broke through, shards of glass raining onto the floor as the figure began to emerge. Its face, or lack thereof, was a void of shifting shadows, its body emaciated and writhing like smoke. Lena screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick, and hurling it at the mirror. The creature recoiled, momentarily retreating back into the glass. "We have to break it," she shouted, her voice trembling with fear. I grabbed a chair, the weight of the wood solid in my hands, and swung it with all my strength. The mirror shattered into 1,000 shards, the figures within emitting an unearthly scream that echoed through the manor. The force of the breaking glass knocked us both to the floor, and for a moment, all was still. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was gone. The frame remained, empty and dark, the carvings now lifeless and dull. The oppressive chill that had permeated the room lifted, replaced by an eerie silence. Lena and I didn't say a word as we gathered our tools and left the manor. The owner called a week later, asking why the restoration was incomplete. I told him the truth, at least part of it. The mirror was beyond repair. That was the last time I worked with mirrors. Lena and I don't talk about Grace Hall Manor often, but when we do, we always end with the same chilling realization. We broke the mirror, but we never found all the shards. You shouldn't have gone in there." The words lingered in the air long after the old man said them. Even now, I wish we had listened. It all started with a letter. Ellie and I had just moved into a rambling Victorian house, a fixer-upper we'd found for a steal. It was the kind of place that screamed charm and history, with its creaking floors and overgrown garden. But as we soon discovered, some histories are better left forgotten. The letter arrived on the second morning, tucked beneath the front door. There was no name, no return address, just yellowed paper and a single line scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Do not open the door on the third floor." Ellie laughed when she read it. Is this supposed to scare us? Probably some neighborhood kids playing a prank. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the letter that felt off. The handwriting was desperate, almost shaky, as though the writer had been in a hurry. And then there was the mention of a door, one we hadn't seen. Curiosity got the better of us. After breakfast, we climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor, a space we hadn't yet explored. It was little more than an attic, filled with old furniture and forgotten trinkets. The air was heavy with dust, the light from the single window weak and gray. And there it was, a plain wooden door, wedged into the far corner of the attic. It looked unremarkable, save for the strange markings carved into the frame, symbols that neither of us could decipher. Ellie ran her fingers over the carvings, her brow furrowed. Weird. Maybe it's a storage closet? Or maybe it's exactly what the letter warned us about, I replied uneasily. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. Come on, it's just a door. What's the worst that could happen? I wanted to argue, but Ellie had already reached for the handle. Ellie twisted the handle, and the door creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo far too loudly in the cramped attic. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet smell that made my stomach churn. Beyond the door was not a storage closet, as I'd hoped, but a narrow, dimly lit staircase spiraling down into darkness. The wood of the stairs was warped and cracked, and the faint glow of a single, flickering light bulb illuminated only the first few steps. Okay, that's creepy, Ellie admitted, taking a cautious step back. We should close it, I said quickly. Just lock it, nail it shut, whatever. This is exactly what the letter warned us about. She hesitated, looking between me and the staircase. But why would someone go to all the trouble of writing that note? Don't you want to know what's down there? No, Ellie. I really don't. But as much as I wanted to leave it alone, I could see the curiosity burning in her eyes. Ellie had always been braver than me, or maybe just more reckless. Before I could stop her, she grabbed the flashlight from the nearby shelf. I'll just take a quick look, she said, already stepping onto the first stair. If it's nothing, we'll close it and forget about it. Ellie, wait. But she was already descending. The sound of her footsteps grew fainter, and soon, only the flicker of her flashlight remained visible. I stood frozen at the top, every instinct screaming at me to follow her or run. Before I could decide, her voice echoed up the stairs. Jason, you need to see this. Reluctantly, I stepped into the doorway. The cold air seemed to wrap around me, sinking into my bones. I peered down the staircase, but Ellie's flashlight had disappeared from view. Ellie, what do you see? I called, my voice trembling. Just come down here, she replied, her voice oddly distant, as though she were much farther away than she should have been. I gripped the railing and descended slowly, each creaking step sending a jolt of anxiety through me. The staircase twisted in impossible ways, spiraling down far longer than the height of the house should have allowed. The further I went, the darker it became, until the weak beam of light from my phone was the only thing guiding me. Finally, I reached the bottom. The narrow staircase opened into a large, windowless room that seemed to stretch farther than my light could reach. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars, hundreds of them, each containing strange, unidentifiable objects suspended in murky liquid. A sickly yellow glow pulsed faintly from somewhere deeper within the room, casting long, eerie shadows. Ellie stood in the center of the room, staring at something just out of my sight. Her back was to me, and she didn't respond when I called her name again. Ellie, I said, my voice firm. What are you doing? "I don't think we're alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A chill raced down my spine. "What do you mean? Who's here?" She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Not who. What?" She pointed to the far end of the room, where the yellow light was strongest. Against my better judgment, I followed her gaze and moved closer. My phone's light flickered, struggling to stay on, but as it dimmed, the object at the center of the room came into view. It was a pedestal, and on it rested an ornate glass orb. Inside the orb, something moved, something alive. The longer I stared, the more the shapes inside seemed to shift and twist, forming grotesque, ever-changing faces. They opened their mouths in silent screams, their expressions of anguish etched in impossible detail. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Ellie reached out, as though drawn to the orb. "It's calling to me. Don't touch it," I shouted, grabbing her wrist. The moment I did, the room seemed to lurch, the air growing heavier, almost suffocating. The jars on the shelves began to shake violently, their contents sloshing against the glass. A low, guttural sound filled the air, like the growl of a distant storm. Ellie's eyes widened, and she stumbled back, pulling me with her. "We need to leave," she said, her voice urgent now. But the staircase was gone. In its place stood a solid wall, the wood warped and knotted into grotesque, organic shapes that writhed as though alive. "What? How is that possible?" I gasped, my heart pounding. The growling sound grew louder, and the shadows began to shift. Something moved in the darkness, something massive and unseen, its presence filling the room. The orb pulsed with light, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers, low, insidious voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Ellie grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We have to destroy it," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it's coming." I nodded, adrenaline overriding my fear. Grabbing a metal rod from a nearby shelf, I raised it high and swung it down onto the orb with all my strength. The glass shattered, and the room erupted into chaos. The growling turned into a deafening roar, and the walls seemed to collapse inward, the shelves crumbling as a violent wind tore through the space. Ellie and I clung to each other, shielding our faces as the light from the shattered orb engulfed everything. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, we were back in the attic. The door to the staircase was gone, replaced by a smooth, featureless wall. Ellie and I didn't speak as we left the house that day, and we've never gone back. It was supposed to be a weekend escape. Ava and I were both drained, she from her relentless marketing job, me from nights buried in data analysis. The idea of renting a secluded cabin in the woods sounded like perfection. No emails, no calls, just us, a fireplace, and maybe a bottle of wine. We found the cabin through a website boasting authentic, untouched wilderness experiences. It was deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest town. The pictures showed a rustic but charming little place, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and big windows overlooking the trees. A perfect retreat. The first day was everything we hoped for. Ava cooked dinner while I stoked the fire, and we spent the evening playing card games and laughing until our cheeks hurt. When night fell, the stars were brighter than I'd ever seen, undimmed by the city's glow. But by the second night, the charm started to crack. It began with a note. I woke to find it pinned to the inside of the front door, a thin piece of paper scrawled with jagged handwriting. "Stay inside after midnight. Do not open the door." My stomach tightened. "Ava?" I called, my voice loud in the quiet cabin. She appeared from the bathroom, toothbrush in hand. "What's up?" I handed her the note. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Is this some kind of joke? It wasn't here when we went to bed. Maybe the owner left it? Like some weird safety thing?" She tried to sound logical, but her voice betrayed her unease. I shook my head. We locked the door. No one should have been able to get in. Ava shrugged, but her eyes flicked nervously to the windows. "Maybe it's a prank. Someone messing with us." I forced a laugh, but something about the note unsettled me. I couldn't explain it, but the handwriting felt wrong. It wasn't just rushed or messy. It was unnatural, almost animalistic. We decided to let it go. By evening, we'd convinced ourselves it was just a harmless prank by some bored local kid. But as the clock crept closer to midnight, a strange tension filled the cabin. At 11:50, the first sound came. A low, distant howl carried on the wind. Ava froze mid-sentence, her hand tightening on her wine glass. "What was that?" "Probably a coyote," I said, though I didn't believe it. The howl came again, louder this time, closer. And then there was the scratching. It started softly, a faint scrape against the front door, almost gentle. Ava and I exchanged a look. "Don't open it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, heart hammering. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It moved, circling the cabin, claws raking against the wood. Then came the tapping, slow, deliberate knocks on each window, one by one. Tap, tap, tap. It stopped at the living room window, where the curtains were drawn. A shadow loomed behind the fabric, tall and angular, its form impossible to mistake for human. "Ava," I whispered, clutching her hand. "I see it," she said, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, a monstrous silhouette framed against the thin curtains. And then it spoke. "You forgot to lock the gate." Its voice was deep, guttural, and wrong, as if it was speaking through water. Ava let out a shaky breath. "What gate?" The figure's head tilted unnaturally, its long limbs twitching against the glass. "The game is played. The gate is open." A loud thud jolted us as something heavy slammed against the front door. Then another and another, the wood groaning under the strain. The shadow at the window vanished. "Get in the bedroom," I shouted, pulling Ava to her feet. We bolted for the back room, slamming the door shut behind us. The sound of pounding filled the cabin now, coming from every direction, windows, walls, doors. It was as if the entire structure was under siege. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Ava and I sat in silence, clutching each other on the bed. My phone showed it was 12:15 a.m. outside. The forest was deathly quiet. "Do you think it's gone?" Ava whispered. Before I could answer, the bedroom door handle began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. "No one's out there," I said, more to myself than to her. The door creaked open, revealing nothing. The hallway was empty, but something was wrong. The air felt heavier, colder, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. Ava gripped my arm. "Look." I followed her gaze to the window. There, written in condensation on the glass, were 2 words. "Round 2. Behind the writing, in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and bent, its face a featureless void. It raised one clawed hand, and the lights in the room flickered violently. The cabin plunged into darkness. We froze in the darkness, barely daring to breathe. The only sound was the pounding of our hearts. A faint flicker of light from the hallway briefly illuminated the room, and in that instant, I saw it, a shadow gliding across the wall, disappearing around the corner. "It wants something from us," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. "What kind of game is this?" I replied, my eyes darting around the room. If this really was a game, there had to be rules. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, they appeared. A scratching noise, sharp and deliberate, came from the door. Letters etched themselves into the wood, one jagged stroke at a time. Ava clutched my arm, her nails digging in as we both stared in horror at the message being carved before us. Rule 1. The round begins when the clock strikes midnight. Rule 2. Follow the keeper's instructions. Rule 3. Breaking the rules ends the game. Underneath the rules, a single word appeared, as if punctuating the chilling decree. "Ready." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What does it mean, the game ends?" Ava's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't think it means we win." The scratching stopped, replaced by a loud, rhythmic ticking. The source was nowhere to be seen, but it filled the air, relentless and ominous. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I fumbled to pull it out. It wasn't a text or a call. The screen was black except for a countdown. 11 hours 59 minutes and 45 seconds. 11 hours 59 minutes and 46 seconds. 11 hours 59 minutes and 47 seconds. Midnight, I muttered. It's almost midnight. Ava grabbed my hand, her grip ice cold. What happens when it hits 0? I didn't have time to answer. The cabin shuddered violently, as though something massive had slammed into its foundation. The windows rattled in their frames, and that guttural, wet voice returned, louder this time, reverberating through the walls. The first task is simple, it growled. Open the door. No, Ava whispered, shaking her head furiously. That's a trap. We can't. But the countdown kept ticking, and my stomach twisted with the realization that refusing to act might be just as dangerous as compliance. Jason, don't do it, she pleaded, pulling me away from the door. The ticking grew louder, deafening as the final seconds counted down. 3, 2, 1. The moment the clock hit midnight, the cabin went deathly silent. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door rattled violently, as though something on the other side was clawing at it, desperate to get in. What do we do? I yelled over the noise, panic taking hold. Another message began carving itself into the wall, the letters slashing through the wood with eerie precision. Fail the first task and the keeper will choose. The rattling stopped. A new sound emerged, a deep, dragging noise, like something massive was pulling itself across the floor. It was inside. Ava screamed, grabbing a nearby lamp and swinging it wildly toward the sound. The bulb shattered, plunging us back into darkness. My phone's flashlight flickered weakly as I swept it across the room, and for a split second I saw it, a hulking figure with impossibly long limbs and a face that wasn't a face at all, just a swirling void of shadows. Open the door, it roared, its voice reverberating through my skull. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking uncontrollably. We have to, Ava. It's the only way to stop it. No, she screamed, grabbing my wrist. We don't know what's out there. Before I could respond, the figure lunged. Its clawed hand swiped inches from my face, and I stumbled backward, slamming against the wall. Ava threw a chair at it, the wood splintering uselessly against its body. Open it, Jason, she finally yelled, tears streaming down her face. I didn't think. I twisted the handle and yanked the door open. The door flew open, revealing nothing but an expanse of impenetrable black. It wasn't the night or the forest outside, it was something deeper, darker. The air shifted, carrying with it a metallic tang that stung my nostrils. The creature froze, its elongated body trembling as if in reverence or fear. Then, slowly, it turned to face the door, its void-like face tilting in an unnatural, jerking motion. Round 1, it rasped, its voice a chilling whisper now. Begins. Before either of us could react, the thing crawled into the darkness, its limbs bending at grotesque angles as it disappeared through the doorway. The air grew heavier, colder, and I felt a pull, a deep, visceral tug, as though the void was trying to drag me in. Ava! I shouted, but when I turned to her, she wasn't there. My heart stopped. I whipped the flashlight around the room, but she was gone. Ava! I screamed again, panic clawing at my chest. The door slammed shut. I don't remember how long I sat there, pounding on the door, screaming her name until my throat was raw. The cabin was silent now, deathly still. The countdown on my phone was gone, replaced by a single word. Survive. My phone screen blinked off, plunging the room into darkness. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, coming from behind me. I spun around, and there she was, Ava, standing at the far end of the room. Relief flooded through me, but it lasted only a moment. Ava? I asked cautiously. She didn't move. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her arms hung limply at her sides. The light from my flashlight flickered across her face, and I froze. It wasn't her. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and her smile stretched impossibly far, the edges of her mouth splitting as though her skin were paper. A dark, viscous liquid oozed from the corners of her lips. Ava? I whispered again, my voice barely audible. She tilted her head further, the crack of bones echoing through the silent room. "It's your turn," she said, her voice layered with another, deeper tone. The words hadn't fully registered before she lunged. I don't know how I escaped. The next thing I remember, I was running through the forest, branches clawing at my face, the taste of blood on my tongue. Behind me, the cabin loomed in the distance, its windows glowing faintly. And in those windows, I saw them, countless figures, watching me, waiting. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. A passing car slammed on its brakes, the driver yelling something as I collapsed onto the asphalt. It's been 3 months since that night. Ava is still missing, and the police have no answers. They searched the cabin but found nothing, no door, no scratches, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. But I know what I saw. Every night, I dream of the cabin, of the creature, of Ava's distorted smile. And every morning, I wake to find the same message carved into my bedroom wall. Round 2 begins soon.